We're going to have a panel discussion now about cybersecurity and cybersecurity strategies, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Justin Kuravilla, Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Risk Ledger. Risk Ledger, of course, sponsoring this particular session. Stuart Seymour, Director of Security at Virgin Media O2. Nick Godfrey, Senior Director and Global Head at Google Cloud. Can I just start by bringing us into today? In the UK, we have two major retailers just hit by a cyber attack. We have M&S, who are pretty much crippled at the moment, and the Co-op, which is also having dreadful problems. Word on the street has it, and I can't say that this is at all true, but it's been suggested to me this morning anyway, that allegedly the cause of the cyber attack at M&S could well have been a bit of social engineering, a bogus call to the IT department asking to change credentials. So allegedly, that was the way in. If that's true, does it tell us anything new? Does it tell us anything that helps, that we should learn from and change our cybersecurity strategies? Justin, could you kick off?
So I think it's important to just remember, we haven't seen any official reports.
No.
They haven't talked about what happened, who did it, what the entry point was. Let's just assume it is perhaps a spear phishing thing. Have we learned necessarily anything new? I don't think so, because essentially this is things that we've learned about for years now in terms of lessons learned. Now, with the advent of AI, and who knows, right? It could have been a voice or a video chat or something that really made it seem like this was someone of importance. But I think hopefully over the last couple of years, organizations have sort of adopted a assume breach mentality anyway, so that you train your staff to ensure that they're doing proper cyber hygiene. But if the worst were to happen, how do you contain the blast radius of an attack, right? And so, we'll see what I have to say to find out if there's any new lessons to be drawn from it. But spear phishing is a very, it's been around for a long time now.
Stuart, stressing, of course, that we don't know actually what the real cause was, but if it were, is there anything new we can learn? Do strategies need to change as a result?
Anything new? Well, I think one of the aspects in cybersecurity is that everything's new always. The threat is continually evolving, and different threat actors utilize different means to target companies and individuals. And as we get better and as we progress and as we shut one door, clearly they go and open another. So in that sense, in the terms of the threat is always evolving, and we need to keep pace with that. An ingenious adversary. No, and really disappointingly, is anything new? No, because you still see ambulance chasing vendors on LinkedIn, sending you emails saying, assuming the role of director of hindsight, giving it the you could have this and I can give you a silver bullet so that this doesn't happen to you. And then peers of ours, also disappointingly, giving their 2 cents when nothing is categorically known for clicks. Depressingly, that's not new either. And I think we can do better. So in terms of Marks and Spencer's, I shop there, and for the past month and a half I've been shopping there. I buy all my groceries there, even though it's 4 miles diversion. We need to support, because there, but by the grace of God,
sure, goes
everybody in this room. So in summary, threat is always evolving, not new, and sadly human nature, not new.
Nick?
Yeah, I'd very much second everything you said. I think, my thoughts are with the team at Marks & Spencer's. It's
totally
tough. Have we learned anything new? I don't think so, as my other panelists have said. Fundamentally, the route into an organisation is either through a technical compromise or a human compromise. That's how the vast majority of these things happen, or start at least. The threats will continue to evolve along those two sort of axes. For example, we have a growing problem with, the remote IT workers, which is a different form of gaining insider access that we're seeing, North Korean actors take advantage of and becoming a growing problem, not just in the US, but in the rest of the world. So it's incumbent on the industry and all of us to really think through what are the controls that we need, how is the threat evolving, how does that change our perspective on what controls are necessary, and to remember that it's a whole of business problem. It's not a security problem, it's not a security teams problem, it becomes an IT problem because the currency and architecture of your IT is a huge sort of factor into how secure you are, but it's also a business consideration as well. The extent to which the business has digitally transformed itself by osmosis over the past few years, again, plays into the change of their surface area that can be attacked and the threat profile that they're exposed to, and the impact of something going wrong. So really needs to be thought of as a whole of business problem and really thought about at the highest levels within the organisation.
And that is exactly what I wanted to pick up on, the fact that it's got to be an entire business approach in terms of either developing or evolving your cybersecurity approach within your organisation. What should companies be doing? Can you expand upon that theme?
Yeah, I think there's a few sort of core things that we're starting to see emerging from regulation and codes of practice and everything, which I think are very important and perhaps haven't been fully thought about in the past in the right ways. The first is, as I said, the interlock and the interplay between the technology, architecture and design and the way it's operated and maintained, and your security posture. To Stuart's point, it's very rarely the case that you can bolt a security product on top of an architecture that was designed 30 years ago and get good outcomes. Fundamentally, that technology was built for a different time, different threat conditions, and so on and so forth. So the importance of not thinking of this as being how much money am I spending on security and which security tools and capabilities and teams am I buying, but thinking of it more broadly as a combined spend on technology and IT, and trying to work out for every kind of dollar or pound, that we have, is it better placed on a security budget, or actually would it be better invested in modernising the IT? So that'd be the first. The second, I think, is really helping boards of directors understand and fully discharge their responsibilities and really help the organisation get this right. There's often a lot of rhetoric around boards of directors and the challenge of getting buy-in for the security program and all those sorts of things. I think that's a very simplified way of looking at it. There is no senior executive or board that I've ever worked with who doesn't buy into security. The question is how and how much, and how do they help, and how do they understand that it's, again, not just a security problem or an IT problem, it's a whole of business problem, and it has to be sort of factored into strategies and business plans and M&A activities and the whole match.
So just two thoughts really. The first is that for me, it's not about security, it's about risk and resilience. And it's understanding your company's risk appetite, what is tolerable, what is intolerable, really testing that, and then being able to, respond and recover when the worst, does happen. I think security done badly is the worst thing in the world. And the question I hate most is, are we secure? Because the answer is no. In order to secure a company, you need to take everyone's phone, their laptop, smash it up, put it in a Faraday cage, bury it in the garden. But it's not much use. So it's all about...
Tempting sometimes.
Oh, gosh. Oh, yes. However, there's not much use. You don't facilitate the business. So it has to be a conversation about risk, and it has to be about resilience. But I'd like to pick up on, or just expand on one point Nick made, which is, you know, if you spend $1 in the security budget or $1 improving IT, that dollar is also improving security, because by modernizing an estate, by getting rid of end-of-life systems, by upgrading, by, you know, ensuring that your estate is robust, you by nature enhance security anyway. So the two are not, you know, mutually exclusive. So risk resilience is where I'd say.
Sure. And just
Really just sort of agree with everything everyone said, right? I mean, I think the narrative that, you know, as Nick mentioned, senior execs and boards don't recognize that cyber risk is a business risk. You know, that's an old narrative at this point. In 2025, everybody gets it, even if they're not a cyber technical expert. Many people I've talked to are at this point, you know, recognize it's an inherent risk to the business, and understanding, you know, how do we treat it like any other business risk, right, from an operational perspective. And to Stuart's point, right, it really comes down to resilience, right? I think, you know, I've chatted with friends before. Yes, we need to have cyber hygiene training for everyone in staff, and that needs to be inherent and, you know, a top-down approach across the company or organization. But your entire security should not be dependent on the first line of person who answers the phone call, right? I wouldn't want my parents being in charge of an organization's department just because they answered the phone. I mean, again, these are the people whose passwords are just Justin1, Justin2, Justin3, despite me telling them all this, right? So, you know, how do we build that
Let
in?
me make a note of that.
It's their passwords, not mine. Yeah. But
I think they're
yeah,
richer than
I'm
you.
Justin567. Yeah. with an exclamation point. But the only other thing to add to that also would just be to reinforce the fact is there is no silver bullet, right? You know, I know a lot of technical people think, oh, this technical solution to deploy it will make me fully secure. But, you know, like we sort of all agree, it's all about people, processes, and technology, right? You can build technology to build it to get to a certain point of security or resilience. You can implement processes to do the same thing, but you also have to depend on the people, and that requires training, but recognizing the fact that they're not infallible. So, you know, think about the various scenarios and plan for issues that could happen from a personal perspective.
Justin, I'm going to come back to you with a question to expand on this and talking about supply chain, but just a word to the people in the room. If you have any questions as this panel discussion goes along, if you catch my eye, just bung your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you and we'll try and get I will get your question asked. And equally, if you're watching online, use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. That's the right-hand side of your screen, isn't it, as you're watching? And I'll relay your questions to the panel. But I wanted to go back, and we've touched upon cybersecurity and risk and resilience being a whole business approach. But it's another way of getting in is your supply chain, isn't it? And I know that is something that Risk Ledger majors on. What are the difficulties of that, Justin?
Well, there's a lot of difficulties, right? So I think, in a way, all these supply chain attacks, I think, are kind of good because it's shedding a light on the issue and the challenges at hand. What I think fundamentally, there's a few issues here. I think part of the problem with supply chain management is understanding that we all live on a digital infrastructure, right? Whether or not it's, even if a manufacturing plant still relies on OT that is managed remotely by whether it's an IT or something. So we all live and work in a digital environment. That's dependent on third-party suppliers, or dependent on their third-party suppliers, or dependent on their third-party suppliers that we've seen over and over. And so with my time in the government, it was very much like we looked at that as a way to try to get access to information that would be easier through a supply chain than others. And so the challenge is how do you have visibility over this? The problem is many companies or organizations only have visibility amongst their third-party suppliers who they have contracts with. And maybe there's language in the contracts that say, tell us about your third parties. You can build a little bit of a picture. But how do you build that holistically, right? It's sort of getting suppliers throughout the chain to sort of disclose who they're working with. And then the other challenge is sort of systemic risks, where each individual organization can identify perhaps their supply chain, but what you want to do is get everyone to overlay their maps together to identify where the real concentration risks are that could impact an entire sector. The challenge is, I think, from my perspective, from the government, is that from a threat intelligence perspective, we've done really good at building out collaboration, building out private public partnerships. Even with the government, we have a history of finding really great classified intelligence and wanting to write a report about it and filing it away. We've gone, over the last couple of years, trying to declassify and put out IOCs and really push out indicators of compromise. I don't see the same thing with supply chain and third-party risk management, right? I think a lot of people think if they disclose who their suppliers are, they're giving up a competitive advantage. But I think, like the threat intel model, I think you can share some information, you can build a collaborative network so that you can fill in the gaps. Because if you don't know what the risks are, you can't plan for it. But if you eventually identify the risks, that's fine. You can mitigate it, you can put some controls, or you can accept it if you feel that it's within your risk tolerance. But I think the biggest challenges are there's a lack of collaboration in the space, a lack of sharing. There's not defined cyber threat intelligence like the way there is for cyber threat intelligence as it is for third-party risk management. So we're trying to solve those challenges.
Oh, thank you. Yes, a question with a microphone. You're very good at this, Stuart. Do you want to just do the whole thing?
No, I'm spent. I don't know. That was my one value add.
Thank you. Your question.
Thanks so much. I want to go back to one of the questions that was a little bit earlier that was discussed, and also what you were talking about, the collaboration piece. Yeah. Because like you, I've seen a lot of, what was it, directors of hindsight. It's a great word, be stealing that. In terms of like the wider community, like we'll see all of this sort of like vendors running around being like, oh, if you had us, everything would be better, that sort of thing. But what is it that the wider community, in your view, could do that would be helpful in scenarios like this? What is there? And you talked about information sharing from a threat intelligence perspective. Is there other things that you can think of that would sort of be more helpful when we're coming across a cyber attack that's obviously affecting multiple people in the industry?
So, yeah, what could we do? First of all, I think your point about information sharing is a great one. And when I worked in defense and aerospace, we had an understanding between all of us that there was going to be no competitive advantage in security. So because if one of us suffers, we all will suffer. And some industries are better at that than others, and I think it's bringing those up to a level, to a sort of a level playing field. I think to one of Justin's point, in my experience, the government, the security services, possibly tend to overclassify things, and by the time they've written a form of words and sent you something, you're already 4 days into whatever, 4 days into whatever the attack was and whoever, they were attacking. And I think for us, I think for vendors, I think it's critical. We as CISOs don't need you to, ambulance chase so aggressively and obnoxiously. We really don't. I've blocked 7 vendors over the past 3 weeks, and I will vow never to work with them again, just because of their reaction to Marks and Spencer's, Co-ops, and Harrods. There is no silver bullet. Each vendor, I think, is really good at a certain aspect of things, and it's all to do with that sort of risk strategies. And I think just a bit of understanding and humanity and support, because, our peers in Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op and other places are going through a really tough time, and the last thing we need is to be vomiting wisdom on social media.
Nick?
I would agree. I mean, I think the only thing I'd perhaps add is, I think we do a good job with sharing certain types of information as an industry. Tends to be more on the sort of technical TTPs, what was the kind of, the technical thing that went wrong or went astray. I think we'd probably all benefit from being better at sharing the so what and what actually happened and the real sort of gory details of it all, because I think that would in turn help with the normalization of cyber attacks and perhaps sort of destigmatization of it a little bit. I can't remember which one of you said it, but it's got to be thought of as almost like an inevitability at some point in most organizations, rather than something that should never ever happen. You can't, Stuart, I remember now, you cannot be secure unless you smash the laptops. And so as an industry, I think whilst there are pockets of empathy displayed in situations, I think there'd be much more we could do to help CISOs and in turn help their organizations understand the realities of this risk and to be more prepared for the fallout when they happen,
No, I mean, I think we're all on the same page here, really, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it is, I do think there's that information sharing challenge. And, to Stuart's point, yeah, we lived and died by this fact that everything was overclassified. It took a lot of work to get it unclassified. I think some of the clients I've talked to in the past, when I've been on the outside, have been concerned about what's the market reaction if they were to disclose something, right? And again, I'm not a business person, but the limited business classes I did in uni was very much like, be upfront as possible, be open about what happened, own it, and typically business is fine. And we've seen that, I think a few clients I've talked to have said, oh, I'm concerned about disclosing this because we're concerned about, I'm getting pushback about the potential market ramifications or impact to the share price or something. And it's, when you're already feeling the pressure of like how to restore your operations and you're getting pushback about, please make sure you don't destroy the business from a market perspective, it can be daunting to try to want to be upfront and sort of explain to everyone, this is what happened, this is why it happened, here's how lessons learned. I was on a panel recently, or I saw someone recently speak about the bank that in Hong Kong that it was like 25 million pounds or dollars of someone who authorized a transfer because someone faked he was a C-suite member. And they spoke very honestly about the challenges and lessons learned, and they were happy to say, listen, this was a scenario we hadn't really planned for. We hadn't thought about the fact that somebody could fraudulently, to this degree, convince someone that they were a senior executive. And so, okay, they implemented some controls, but that's an important lesson that needed to be shared at the risk of embarrassment or whatever for the wider good.
I'm going to come to a question in the audience just in 1 second, but can I just ask to develop a theme? The subject of directors of hindsight and the ambulance chasing vendors. I mean, it's blindingly obvious, isn't it, that that's the exact opposite to taking a strategic approach to cybersecurity rather than some form of knee-jerk reaction. What should CISOs be doing today to adjust their strategies? What should they be looking out for today? Are there any evolved threats or evolved changes in the landscape which they should be taking account of today? Nick, perhaps I can throw that at you.
Well, I mean, I think the CISO has a very hard job, and because the ultimate strategy, if you like, is probably something that looks more like 3 to 5 years plus, because as Stuart and I said, it will involve a degree of IT modernization as well as layering security on top. And so you kind of need to have that 3 to 5 year strategy, ideally in lockstep with your CIO, CTO, and underwritten by the board. But you also have to have a kind of 1 year strategy because you can't afford to wait for the 3 to 5 years to fully play out. And so that's where I think having a good focus on threat intel and really understanding how the nature of the threat's evolving is important, because you're in the business of tweaking your controls, your technical controls, your human controls based on what you can see evolving as the threat actors evolve. AI is the latest sort of evolution of the threat profile. The threat profile tends to evolve as technology changes and evolves. And for a CISO, the AI creates two kind of macro things to think about from a threat perspective. One is the threat actors actually using AI I can get into more detail about what we're seeing with that, but that's something to consider.
Yes, we'll come to that, absolutely.
The other, of course, is the use of AI by your company creates a new service area for you to worry about. So I think the way to sort of balance that near and far strategy and those apparently inconsistent timelines for getting to the right ideal secure state, has to involve that use of understanding what's going on with the threat actors in order that you can make the shorter term adjustments.
Should we take the question from the gentleman who's been very patient?
Hi, Christian from SP UK and the Secretariat for the All Parliamentary Group of Cyber Innovation in the UK. In terms of driving standards, I believe a government has a role in that, and we are expecting the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill later this year in the UK. I suppose, what's your view of a government's role in improving security, the security landscape across UK business? And what would you like to see more of from government in terms of practical policy and regulation?
I think government has a critical role to play. I really do. And I think we also have a critical role to play with government to help government understand what industry's pain points are, and sort of vice versa. I'm a supporter of regulation, and I think regulation in all the industries that I've been in have made that industry better from a sort of a cybersecurity lens. But I think what can government do is, I think there has to be an understanding of what the business relies on, so that with the best intentions in the world, we're not being inadvertently hamstrung. So I think greater partnership and collaboration and understanding as to, when a piece of regulation or a piece of law is coming in, more broad consultation. From a cybersecurity point of view, what can the government do? Tackle fraud. Stand up a department that specifically looks at fraud. Give policing more dedicated resources that tackle fraud. Because I think that's if you think about where we are from a cybersecurity lens, as CISOs, we're looking at two things. We're looking at potential impact from nation states, but the other thing is cyber criminality and fraud. And a tougher strategy on that, as opposed to me sending reports into a vacuum of action fraud and nothing ever happening, is I think where the government could really, really help.
Justin, what can government do for you?
So I'm going to probably contradict myself a little bit here, because, like, for example, I'm a petrol head that loves clean air regulations, right? So I think you can have both, right? From a security perspective, right? I don't know if this is a phrase here in the UK, but I know it's in the US at least. There's a phrase, regulations are written in blood, right? As in, it's typically a reactionary response to building codes or fire safety or something like that. And like with cyber, same kind of thing. Usually it's lessons learned, and governments think, okay, now we have to set sort of a standard. And so I think I would agree. We should all be moving towards, and I'm glad we're moving towards resilience. I know it's sort of a buzzword, but it seems the natural extension from, back in the day you had a loud list, then it went to, default deny all, then it finally moving our way to sort of assume breach and build in resiliency. So as a recognition of the fact that we're all interconnected, right? An incident at one company can have a domino effect. I agree, let's build in some baseline resiliency. I think the challenge is we want to make sure that it's not too heavy-handed, right? Because the impact on a massive multi-million-dollar corporation is separate from a startup of like 10 people. So how do you ensure that you can apply it proportionally based on company size and stuff? And perhaps based on the criticality of the service, right? If the service that this small company provides to a particular sector is extremely critical, then that has to be taken into account. So it's sort of nuanced. I'm giving you sort of a non-answer, but it's like, I believe government has a role to play. I believe they should be pushing the envelope a bit, but how do we ensure that we're not stifling smaller companies who are possibly innovating for various reasons, whether it's security or just technological advances? So I think eventually you've got this point where regulations will, start it, but eventually I think the market will then decide, right? I think from a security maturity perspective or a resiliency perspective, I think companies will see that as a competitive advantage, and if they can figure out how to be more resilient and then sort of demonstrate that to their clients, you're more likely to maybe choose their services if you believe if they were to go down, your services aren't going to be affected. So, but we'll see what happens. But.
Nick, I reckon Google must have more money and more power than the current government, or most governments. What's your advice or request to Sir Keir or Mr. Trump?
Well, it's interesting because historically cloud providers weren't regulated in the classic sense, but we are now moving into that world in certain jurisdictions, and we're actually very supportive of that. We think it will just raise the bar and improve the trust levels between critical service providers like us and our customers who are subject to their own regulation. So generally very supportive for all the reasons that my panelists have talked through. I think there's three things I think are helpful from a regulatory perspective, or disproportionately helpful perhaps, because I agree all regulation in the industries I've worked in has helped. The things that I think are particularly good, which we're starting to see, is the regulation focusing much more on business outcomes and the requirement for the business as a whole to determine what its preferred outcomes are, which in turn ultimately flows backwards to what technology and security you need, but it doesn't start with what technology and security you need. Things like the FCA's and PRA's operational resilience approach to regulation, I think that's what I mean by outcome. Couple that with the second point is appropriate responsibility established within companies, generally at the board level. We've seen in the US SEC regulations, and in the UK and in the past couple of weeks a code of practice announced regarding how they believe boards should oversee this risk and everything else. I think if you couple one with two, the outcomes-based approach with people on the board having responsibility for those outcomes and getting comfortable that they can achieve them is a good sort of strong approach. And then the third thing, I think, back to how you framed the question, the regulation and helping companies manage their supply chain risk, particularly their critical suppliers, I think, is an area that sort of that continues to be increasingly useful and could benefit from more looking at.
Okay, I think a gentleman has a question.
I am. Myself is Libin. I'm an individual security contractor, cybersecurity contractor, working for different clients, and the last one was Marcus Spencer. I just done with my contract in Marcus Spencer. So the question I have is, as a CISO, so as an individual contractor, we come to the clients and we do different projects or different security works for the clients, right? So we found out, like, okay, you have spent millions of pounds on the tools or on the cybersecurity solutions of vendors. For example, on your edge security or on your vulnerability assessments, you spend lots of money on the vendors, but it's just sitting there doing not much, or it might be not configured properly. So as a contractor, we come and we find it out and we advise, look, you have all this, but it is not working on its own correctly. Maybe it may be configured, but maybe still on the monitoring mode, so not moving to the defensive mode. So if you have such a situation, like someone come to you and say, look, these are there for you, but it's not doing its job correctly at the moment. What would be your reactions, or what would you do to fix all those things?
Yeah, so great question, and it's a malaise that I've seen, throughout my time in industry, where I've inherited roles from other people that have gone shiny, shiny tool, buy it, and then they buy it, they implement it, they spend CapEx on it, because CapEx budgets typically are easier to secure than OpEx budgets. They spend CapEx on it, and you've got a lovely new car that nobody knows how to drive. And the people that implemented it are like, cheers, easy, I'm off. So that is a problem that we do see. So we at Virgin Media O2 have taken a really deliberate strategy, which is, so what you're talking about in essence is people, process, and technology, but just the technology and the people and the lack of merge between the two. What we've deliberately done is our people inside are the people that configure, develop, and run the tools. So we're not going to get vendor locked. I grow and develop my people. They get greater skills. And then the car is driven in 6th gear as opposed to out of 2, because nobody knows what what the car does. And I think there's a really curious model about outsourcing and insourcing. And I've worked at a company where a lot of the security was outsourced, but we were completely reliant on the vendor and on the vendor's will. So I think the disconnect is we focus too much on the shiny tool and not enough on the people, and not enough on developing the people, growing the people, which then allows you to retain the people. So that's where my thinking
sorry, one
is.
question. Do you trust on the vendors when they say this product is great, it can do this, and they configured it, but when it comes to the configuration, do you 100% trust on the vendors, or you take another advice from an individual external contractor to support your company to move on with that project to be completed?
Well,
or you just rely only on the vendors?
No, you always trust but verify, right? Because, so we're quite openly and proudly a Google security consumer, delighted with the product. Rounds on you.
That's good.
But Google doesn't understand my environment better than I do. And while carrying on with the car analogy, while they've built us an exquisite car, they don't understand the country lanes that it has to be driven on. And therefore, I think it's irresponsible of us not to be intimately involved with the product and tool that we purchase. And also not be blinded by the fact that actually a lot of companies that I know of aren't mature enough to have all of these 7 Ferraris. And actually, by just having one nice Mercedes and focusing on your IT estate and focusing on legacy systems, end of life, attack surface, it's better than having 3 cars that you're never going to drive because you don't know how to, but someone just persuaded you to and you went shiny, shiny tool.
Let's raise it to Lamborghini and Maserati status. It talks, the question and Stuart's answers talk very much to the point you made earlier, Nick, about bolt-ons to legacy systems are never going to be entirely appropriate. It's about the entire transformation, which is the point you made earlier.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the example I'd cite is vulnerability management. And so, it's quite common for a security team to go out and buy a vulnerability discovery engine, a scanner, or whatever you want to call it. And there's the car, and it works, and it tells you about the millions of vulnerabilities they have, but that's not really that helpful. And so you think, well, what do we need to do to patch those systems and get rid of those vulnerabilities? Well, we need to be able to deploy patches, right? Okay, so we go and get the deployment infrastructure. What do we need to do to have that integrated into change management? Oh, we need to identify change windows where we can deploy to the environment and so on and so forth. But actually, the reason that an organization will have a great number of vulnerabilities is probably not because of those relatively simple things to solve. It'll be because they technically can't deploy patches to a lot of their environment because they don't have the test environments to do the regression testing. They possibly don't even have the source code for some of the applications that they have running, and therefore they couldn't possibly rebuild that environment if they wanted to. And so, yes, perhaps you need to, at some point, have a flash vulnerability scanning Lamborghini, but you don't need it straight away. You need to go and solve more basic fundamental problems, and that will get you a much faster return on your investment.
We have 4 minutes left, which is disastrous. There's so much to get through. There are 2 questions I wanted to get in, or at least one main theme, which is going back to AI, friend or foe. Both sides in the escalating war are using and deploying. So question 1, AI, friend or foe, and a question that's come in sort of speaks to that a bit online. To prevent recent cyber attacks, what importance do you place on human controls, especially for AI training and cyber awareness? Can we throw all that into the mix? Justin, do you want to pick up that? Friend or foe and human training for AI?
So a couple things.
Yep.
Both, right? I think, unfortunately, cybersecurity for decades have just been sort of a cat and mouse game where, attackers, come up with new tactics, defense, you stop it, and you're just constantly cat and mouse. So I think the issue is if you just willingly sort of ignore AI, you're going to be left behind, and so it's a matter of understanding what is it doing from a threat perspective, and what are the new threats that it can provide, what are attackers using with it, whether it's just lowering the bar for less skilled people to be able to deploy more advanced attacks than they could have been, or being used by APTs who are doing it for various different reasons. So it's understanding what those are and seeing whether or not AI can be deployed smartly in your environment, because I've seen a lot of folks who are just under pressure, just deploy AI, it's a buzzword, deploy, 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 and without understanding what the actual business outcome is going to be. One, you're sort of either just wasting money for something that isn't going to do anything, but 2, depending on what that deployment actually is, exposing yourself to new threats, right? If you haven't trained the workforce, if you're putting sensitive information to a model that now can be potentially exploited or poisoned, and so there's a whole ramification of things. So it can be a friend if it's just done in a smart, thoughtful, holistic approach, right? Again, not a bolt-on, but if it's integrated within this overall business strategy, yes, it can be good. But because it's coming, you have to get ahead of it. And sorry, the second question, second part? You said friend or foe, and then?
People. Do companies place enough emphasis on human training and cyber awareness and AI awareness within the company? Talking about the people within your company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just yet another discipline that has to be trained now. Yeah. But again, the entire responsibility of entire organizations, exposure to AI threats cannot be just down to one person, right? It has to be, ultimately all these things are sort of a layered defense in depth, right? Where you're trying to raise the cost of an adversary to try to get into your system. Maybe they give up because they don't have the time, money, or resource, but if you're a nation state and you're a target of a nation state, they've got all the budget time to get in. So what can you do to do this? And so people does play a role in that. How do you get them to help defer or deter against some attacks? But ultimately it's ensuring that people are aware of cyber threats, are getting the training they need, but also know that they're not sort of going to be disciplined based on issues or things that they've brought up, right? Like if they clicked on a spear phishing email, you report it, you want to encourage it and incentivize that, rather than sort of a stick versus a carrot approach.
Stuart, your perspective on the AI cyber war?
It's a bit like Rick Astley. That's my perspective. AI's been here for years, and it's just now the new hype, just like when Rick Rolling became a new hype. I think it's both friend and foe, but I think again there's a lot of snake oil attached to it, insofar as I remember getting pitches about this wonderful new silver bullet or Lamborghini, and then getting the pitch 6 months later saying silver bullet with a Lamborghini with AI, and it's like, oh my, yeah, no, I have to have it then. So I think that there needs to be a note of caution with AI. Can do some great things. We've used it. We use it within cybersecurity quite heavily. We've automated around 900 hours a month using AI, which allows my team to do the really cool stuff that they joined cybersecurity to do, which is threat hunt and experiment and go look for adversarial tips, TTPs, develop hypotheses, test hypotheses, build labs, all this sort of thing, which, you know, cutting and pasting one spreadsheet from this system to this system, you know.
Not fulfilling?
No, I was at my town hall, and I was talking about, you know, AI and the fact that, you know, we've saved 900 hours and it was brilliant. And I was like, and I've never met a person that, you know, loves Excel and loves cutting one spreadsheet from another. And then someone put their hand up and said, no, I do. So, you know, there's that's the joy of the sort of the diversity, I guess. There's horses for every course. And speaking about the joy of diversity, which is, in essence, people, we look upon our people as our most vulnerable asset, because it's the people that will report, you know, the absence of the normal, the presence of the abnormal. It's the people that will stay up all night and work weekends during an incident. It's the human being. And again, we could talk about this for hours on end as a topic on its own. What, you know, is AI going to replace people, et cetera, et cetera. But people, you know, they're critical. And I said this before answering the gentleman's question about, you know, we go for people, process, and technology. And for so long, it's been technology, technology. Do we need a process? Forget about the people. Yeah. And I think that needs to flip on its head, and it needs to be a focus on people.
Nick, I'm really sorry to ask you to have the last say briefly, but you raised the subject.
So we feel on friend-end foes, as
of course
everyone said, we feel on balance at the moment that AI is providing more advantage to the defenders than the attackers for various reasons, like the example Stuart provided. And we think that as we sort of further the use of AI, it will continue to be more of an advantage to the defenders versus the attackers. That said, the threat actors are using it. It's improving their speed, if you like, speed to market. It's improving some of the quality of their phishing approaches. There's some interesting cases regarding deep fake videos and various other things. What we're not seeing, though, yet is completely novel AI-based attacks. So we're absolutely not seeing that. And so that's why we feel that the defender has an advantage at this point.
Thank you. We could go on and on and on. We're out of time and we must move on. I found this conversation completely absorbing, and I haven't got to anywhere near the subjects and questions I wanted to. So thank you very much all. It's been absolutely brilliant. We're going to continue the conversation about cybersecurity strategies this afternoon with Martin Booth from Dunnhumby. Up next right now is a networking break, but at 12:10 we sort of continue this theme because we're moving on to AI and cyber risk, the human factor. It's as if we planned all this exactly. So gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. A brilliant panel. Thank you.